Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're quite happy to have you with us. My name is Zach. I am Enterprise Sales Lead here with CluedIn, and today we will be discussing the topic of how much do you think you know your MDM? The idea here is to rethink and challenge the preconceived ideas of the MDM technology or solutions out there in the market. That being said, I have the pleasure of being joined today by Dan and Richard, whom I'll let introduce themselves, and then we can move forward from there. Richard?
Thanks, Zach. And yeah, thank you. And hi, everyone. Richard Carberry. I am a senior technical specialist at Microsoft. I've been here for about 3 years, focusing exclusively on data and AI. I've got quite a bit of history in MDM, having I think I built my first probably cottage industry MDM solution about in the late 90s, back when MDM was probably a twinkle in everybody's eye. So yeah, I've done a lot in this space. It's been a big part of my career in terms of helping customers adopt MDM and enabling the benefits that provides. So yeah, looking forward to today, and I'll hand over to Dan.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Richard. And firstly, Zach, thank you again for the opportunity, for myself and Richard to co-present with yourself. My name's Dan Stillwell. I'm a data and AI director at Microsoft. Do a lot of work between our two organizations, both Microsoft and CluedIn as well, because it's vital for our customer needs and requirements. I run teams of technical specialists, focusing again, like with what Richard said, on data and AI. So very much the whole of the Azure data and AI stack, with the objective really to help our customers be ultra successful with their data analytics and AI implementations. We know we're in an era at the moment where AI is top of mind for every organization. So, our remit is to try and make sure that we unlock all of them organizations and the potential that they hold within there as well. Before we kind of go on to the main content of the presentation, I do want to set the scene a little bit of what I'm seeing at the moment and what Microsoft is seeing in the industry. I meet with many different organizations, cross industry, all different roles, from CIOs to COOs to CDOs to engineers and architects. And again, in front of us here showcases some of the challenges at the moment, which are just preventing us or slowing us down from becoming that data and AI driven organization. Data is the king, for any organization to get competitive edge, to drive productivity, to drive revenue. Data is what we need to utilize with the analytics and the AI capabilities to make sure that we can drive the business into the future in that respect there as well. But some of the things in front of us are holding us back a little bit at the moment. And again, this flows from company culture, it flows from skills within the industry at the moment. But one of the things that we want to focus on is the lack of data or data quality within organizations as well. For me, data quality is the key. Whether that's operational systems, all the way to analytical systems, all the way out to AI in that respect, we must make sure that we can have data quality for reporting and action purposes. But actually, the other key thing as well is that we need to make sure that we adhere to regulation, compliance, and security as well. We need to ensure that we can follow that data all the way from inception at source, all the way out to presentation layer, whether that's presenting it to your customers, sharing it externally, or even for internal use as well. We need to make sure that we understand that it's accurate and we understand that it's compliant and it's traceable as well there. So some of the common themes I'm seeing at the moment as well, and some of the conversations I'm having linking to some of the challenges, is how do we organize ourselves as an organization? If I look back kind of over the last decade or so, centralization was the key. So very much it's a centralized IT function which would then manage, control the data throughout the whole organization there as well. And again, there are benefits from that. We keep that control within and we keep it secure. But as times have changed, as we've seen analytics being driven, as we've seen the business units, each of the departments driving their own data-driven analytics and AI, we need to now look at a balanced approach where we give enough agility, but also that compliance and security that we don't lose control of our data accuracy and our data all up there as well. So again, most of my conversations now with customers are really focused around where culturally and operationally do we see ourselves, all the way from a centralized traditional route with federation in the middle, where we have some centralized control, but then we're giving some autonomy out to the business units, all the way to more agility through a decentralized, where we put the autonomy completely on the business groups to implement their solutions as well. And that's all the way from data governance, all the way to cost management or chargeback in that respect there as well. But one of the key things, and if I just showcase this architecture slide in front, just to put a bit of meat on the bone of that, architecture now is pretty complicated. Again, if we're looking at an analytical and AI solution, one of the power of that is to make sure that we are utilizing data and data accuracy by pulling in many different data sources. That's what gives us our competitive edge. If you see the architecture slide in front of you, you can see that we're pulling in data here from the Azure ecosystem, from other cloud vendors, all the way to on-premise and other vendors and third parties there as well. And again, part of that is to then make sure that we are utilizing a centralized data approach with our storage on one lake, and then ultimately giving the autonomy back out to marketing, sales, supply chain, and corporate in this example, so that they can then shape and choose what they want to do with that data. And again, there may be cases where we actually share that data even across business units as well. So again, this is fantastic to give us that competitive edge, to give us that data-led analytical edge. But it comes with the challenge of how then do we make sure that marketing is being responsible for their data in the same way that supply chain is being responsible for their data? How can we make sure that the corporate data can be trusted for data accuracy in the same way that the sales organization does there as well? So again, we come back into some key points. So what Richard and then Zach are going to be speaking about is really how the partnership between Microsoft, Purview, the data ecosystem, and CluedIn can really help drive this particular triangle. And if we focus on this, the common governance, making sure that data lineage is followed, making sure that we can understand source to destination is understood, and making sure that we uphold all of our compliance regulatory requirements as well. And on that, I will pass over to Richard.
Thanks, Dan. And yeah, I think all amazing points around the mesh. It's always a good conversation to have with customers about what's the best way for them to adopt to get the best out of their organization and their data products. But these are challenges that I think every customer faces, and as we, regardless of what the customer ends up picking, the challenges around ensuring that the data is in a state that's able to be utilized to drive better decisions, or perhaps adopting AI and using AI on top of that data, that can take some time. And I think a lot of the innovations that we're seeing within the MDM space is predominantly a number of things, but AI, without question, is one of those key innovators within every space, and MDM is no different. So you think about things like the classification of the fields that you're mastering, glossary terms, or even automatically suggesting data mapping or rules that a user can then review, as opposed to maybe draft from scratch, as we would have done, at least as I remember 20 years ago, having to build rules-based engines with lots and lots of code, and that took quite considerable amount of time. And I think AI is now entering into this space and really expediting the onboarding of MDM. Some of the other innovations we're seeing as well is that kind of schemaless ingestion. So a lot of the times driving data from a source and then having to determine the rules in which how it maps to there. Sure, AI could do it, but having to do that as part of the ingestion can be tough. So using graph-based schemaless ingestion can really speed up the MDM assessment and ingestion of that data into the tool to make the mastering of each of those records. And beyond that, we're also seeing quite a lot of automation in this space as well around that, the workflow associated with MDM. So data stewards have got, they've got I would say, not an unenviable task of having to deal with all the different aspects about how you master and govern data within any organization. And if you think back to what Dan was talking about earlier on, in terms of those kind of mesh architects, which are very popular across multiple industries, each of those different business units are going to have their own steward. They might have their own ways of thinking. And part of the job is to ensure that data is consistently managed. So using AI to automate that, the MDM workflow is a huge time saver and an efficiency gain for every organization out there. And I think beyond AI as well, from a Microsoft perspective, we're definitely seeing, as again Dan alluded to earlier on, that tight integration between CluedIn and tools, some of my favorite tools like Fabric and particularly Purview as well. So allowing users not only just to build their analytics, but actually infusing the MDM capability from CluedIn into the Fabric ecosystem, which I think is one of the key differentiators. Like a lot of organizations, if you can imagine, like I want to go into Fabric, or I want to land into my analytics platform and I want to bring in some new data. I need to then master that. Okay, now I'm going to log in over here and manage that here. All that can be done within one window. So again, even though that's not an AI thing, and you might be surprised that we're not always talking about AI and innovating everything, but just making it simpler for users to interact, review the data and master it within one pane of glass is a huge boon and efficiency gain from them. We're also, I think as well, with that Fabric integration with CluedIn, and as Dan mentioned before, that kind of the One Lake implementation there, that allows every organization to centralize all their data, either virtually linking it through shortcuts within Fabric, or actually landing the data in. CluedIn can access that and manage all of that data, so you don't have data scattered to the wind and not knowing where it's came from or where it's been used. And that's why lineage is so important. And I think all of these things are really what's streamlining the MDM adoption. And I think we are seeing, without question, the adoption of MDM. And if I cast my mind back like 10 years ago, MDM was a tough implementation. It could be a project that you would measure in years. And I think with these innovations that we're seeing now, you're seeing that cut way back, where you're starting to see incremental value very quickly, and I would say probably months, maybe sometimes weeks, depending on the complicated nature of the architecture. But it's a really fast adoption, and what that adoption allows you to do is start to take more advantage of AI, and you'll be, AI is what everybody's talking about, and I'm sure Zach and Dan would probably agree with me here. Is like every other conversation that we have is, how do we get AI to do more things in our organization, take the pain of doing a process that's very laborious and takes a lot of time to implement. And a lot of the time users will come to us with challenges around AI, and I'm reminded of a customer of mine who was looking to drive efficiency in generating pipe, right? So I'll not go into the specific details of it, but they wanted to allocate workload to certain users based on a set of criteria, effectively. And when we brought it right down, the challenge wasn't assigning the data, it was the reference data associated with who it was supposed to go to. So when a bit of work came in, they wanted the AI to look at that particular bit of work and then decide which person in the organization that should be assigned to. Now, AI could do that, but without grounding in solid quality data, i.e. reference data in this instance, that would hallucinate very badly. So what we ended up doing was looking at how you could then use AI to integrate with the users in a better way, so they would update and take more control over their reference data. And I think that was a really key differentiator, because really what's happening, if you strip that back, is it's not that the AI needs quality, well-governed and controlled master data to make better decisions and to reduce that time. You're not going to drive the maximum amount of efficiency and value out of your AI programs without a solid, grounded, mastered data set. And that's where MDM absolutely changes that adoption and drives that additional value from there. And I think more often than not, you have bigger challenges around how users then feel empowered or less enthused around AI adoption, right? I think one of the things I see quite a lot with AI adoption, without that thought behind mastering and providing good data out to users, is that where the AI then doesn't drive out immediate or the accuracy isn't high enough, users can be switched off immediately from that kind of interaction. So if you can imagine, you're maybe doing some question, you've maybe built a natural language interface for users to interact with their underlying data. And they might say, hey, how many sales have I had last week? If your sales data is not mastered and cleaned, then they could get really inconsistent responses back. So the minute that happens, those users then start to be switched off from AI. They don't like the adoption, and you have to then consider, before you release that, or before you allow your users to adopt AI in that kind of scenario, you need to make sure that data is clean, you need to make sure it's trustworthy, and you need to make sure that your DQ rules are managed very effectively. And I think now we can hand over to Zach, and he's going to walk us through how CluedIn takes advantage of those.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. And we certainly agree with the initial thoughts you shared with us around the challenges of MDM and how it's perceived in the market. It goes without saying that those that are in the data space or are working on MDM, every time we discuss the topic, immediately we think of very resource hungry, long timelines, long time to value kind of approach to that project. And we hear it all the time, but we are here to challenge that. And we are here to say, hey, there is a different way. There is a modern way. There is a innovative way of getting you to value quickly while keeping that data accuracy and the data foundation to a level you need it to be, so you can get value out of, for example, AI, right? And this is thanks to the collaboration that CluedIn have with you guys, with Microsoft. So without further ado, I mean, this is what would CluedIn look like, right? And CluedIn is a Microsoft native tool. So for those of you who are familiar with the Azure ecosystem, they can see there is like a feel and look that makes our solution an extension to an environment that you already know. And the idea for CluedIn is to make sure we're providing a tool for business users. Right? It doesn't mean that it's a magic box. It doesn't mean that it does, everything automatically and so on and so forth. But it means that we want the data experts, the domain experts, the data stewards to be part of this supply chain of data. Why? Because we can ask our IT colleagues to help us move the data around, make sure it's secure, make sure they're helping us if there are any difficulties. But we want somebody like me, for example, who know what customer data looks like, to be part of it, so I can validate and I can make sure that I'm adding my value to that. Now, that being said, why we're talking about CluedIn in the context of it being modern. So there is this, as I said earlier, traditional approach to MDM, which is heavily focused on something we call upfront data modeling. And maybe Richard, you would relate to this because you've been involved in MDM since a long time ago. But it's very simple. Basically, you would have to build an actual model, a schema, before you can get it into the MDM tool, hoping that it will give you the result you're seeking. Right? In theory, it sounds simple. However, if we're dealing with different data sources, if we're dealing with different domains, if we're dealing with multiple use cases, every time there is a tiny change, I have to go back to that initial model, change it so I can factor that change in, so I can get to that result. And the problem is, even sometimes you don't know what the end results would look like. You don't know what the golden record should look like because things are changing. Maybe we have a new way of onboarding customers. Maybe we've acquired a new company. right? So this whole approach made and contributed heavily to this negative image MDM has in the market so far. And that's what CluedIn is slightly different. We don't require that. And that's why from the get-go, you would face something that is quite modern and different, right? We believe in the fact that MDM should be fluid, should be flexible, like the data, right? When I have all type of data, all sizes of data, well, I should be able to bring the data in, and I will build in my model as I am cleaning, as I am mapping, as I am processing my data through CluedIn. So that way, when I'm building that final image, that golden record, if you will, I can always take a step back or two, reiterate, add, edit, delete, without having to go back and do that initial work that we have to do and spend months and weeks doing. So this is CluedIn, and this is what it looks like. As I said, in extension to the Microsoft ecosystem, we are a native solution within the Azure ecosystem. And one of the elements beyond the fact that you don't have to do upfront data modeling, which is huge for those who are in this space, maybe they can relate to what I'm saying. There is the power of AI. And I know Richard spoke about it, Dan spoke about it, but it is what's driving a lot of projects currently, and it's here to stay, and it's gonna drive and become even more interesting and even more profound. Through our collaboration with Microsoft, we've been one of the first MDM tools out there to leverage the power of OpenAI. And frankly, the results and how it's perceived by our customers is quite astonishing, because now we're getting to results that otherwise will take quite a few clicks or will require somebody else to help us to get there. Things like, hey, can you tell me what this data set looks like? What is it about? Or create validations rule for me, create data quality rules. And Richard, you mentioned that earlier, right?
Yep.
So, and it does that in the background, which is amazing. But you as a human, as somebody who is expert in the data, can validate and be part of that story as well. So with that question of can MDM take me to value quick, I think with this, we are really starting to make that as clear as possible for our customers, because now they can trust a tool that is highly automated and focus on business users. And with the power of AI, it's actually quite user-friendly, because now we're using, the style of Copilot, right? ChatGPT, right? Everybody knows it. I use it. Probably most people use it. And it's just using natural language. I'm able to get amazing results. We have what we call a low-code integration, and the whole idea again of making sure that we are by the business, for the business, modern tool is not to limit you in terms of the data sets or the domains you would like to work with as an organization, right? Because maybe you would want to start with one use case, focus on employee, or focus on assets, or focus on other data sets, but at the same time, they correlate with each other, right? They actually interact with each other or not. But CluedIn or an MDM tool should be the actual glue that's going to help you get the data from different sources, different places, and make sure that you are integrating the data quickly into the platform so you can see results. And again, this goes back to that initial idea, as I said, of no upfront data modeling, which allows you to go get the data raw as it is into the platform and start working with it and understanding what it does, rather than actually having to work with the data first of all before you can even get it into the tool. And that's adding a huge amount of value to our customers so far. And we talked about this a little bit. So augmented data modeling, as I said, it's all about making sure that you don't have to do that modeling up front. You do it as you are building your golden record, your single view of your data, and make sure that you are building your schema and knowledge and everything like that as you are getting used to the tool and as you are going through the tool and your own data. All of this is again based on the fact that we are modern, but we are actually graph-based as well. All right, which makes that connection between the data is quite simple, straightforward, and making sure that value is there without having to do that upfront work. I know I sound like a broken record, but goodness me, how many times do I hear it in projects we are in? And sometimes we get involved in projects where, an actual MDM project started months and months ago and we're nowhere near value, and we're still using Excel to do the data work. So sorry if I'm being repetitive, but it's very key, I think, if we talk about being modern in an MDM space, it truth starts there. That's for me key element. And everything gets us to this idea of how can we be more resilient? How can we be more enterprise, a modern enterprise out there, more competitive, more close to our customers, taking to market new products, and so on and so forth. Well, all of that needs to be made based on decisions that are made in a timely manner, right? And we now live in an era where everything has to happen yesterday. All right. So if we have to wait for a report as an exec that's going to give you a view of how you're performing in a certain market for 3, 6 months, maybe weeks, maybe more, right? And instead of getting it in a timely manner, that defeats the purpose. So the whole idea here is, okay, we need trusted data. We need an MDM tool. AI is helping us, and everything is helping us as an organization to make the right decisions for our customers moving forward. And just to finish off here, gentlemen, is maybe an example of an actual project where we are seeing this in actual reality is we're working with an organization here in the UK, and the initial use case for which they're using CluedIn is Employee 360. And the idea is this organization is managing a vast amount of assets, right? And those assets are critical. Therefore, they needed to make sure that their employees who are working on those assets are up to date with their training, certifications, and so on and so forth for actual reporting and regulatory purposes. Now, it sounds quite simple. However, this is a large organization. We have multiple training tools. We have multiple data sources. Some of them are still legacy. Some of them are on the cloud. And it's just making it very, very hard to get that clear view of, for example, Zach as an employee working on asset A and B. And is he qualified? What was the last time that he got the training? And when did it happen and how? Right? And this is what CluedIn is doing, is helping them gather the data from different data sources and create what we call that golden record of single employee. And that's with the help as well of Microsoft, right? Because we're talking now about data governance, because that lineage is very important, as you mentioned earlier, Dan. With the help of Purview and CluedIn, I can have a view of my assets from above, but then with CluedIn I can zoom in to an actual record level. Therefore, I know exactly what happened to my data from source all the way to that visualization that I'm presenting to our execs. I hope that was clear. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Richard, for joining me today. It's been, as usual, an absolute pleasure. And we thank you all.
Thank you again, Zach, so much.